Namaskar, this is Akhilesh Bhargava. Welcome to Tit-Bits on Business and Finance with me. The government of India is finally convinced that there is a slowdown in the Indian economy. It is convinced that the economy is in a stress situation and it is sluggish at the moment. The finance minister has been meeting representatives of various sectors and segments of the economy, and if reports are to be believed, a reform package for reviving the growth of the Indian economy is awaiting the approval of the PMO. While the PMO's approval will take its own time, those segments like auto, which are very stressed and crisis-ridden, they have been seeking a financial aid package which also consists of tax relief in order to ensure that they survive these tough times and their closures are to the minimum. This kind of a revival package phenomena actually started with the budget. In the budget, the government had announced a 1 lakh crore revival package for the NBFC sector, and that was to ensure that they are given financial support so that the doddering NBFC sector does not collapse. Perhaps the auto sector has taken a cue from that, and even the automobile sector of India has demanded a 1 lakh crore relief package from the government of India. The present slowdown in the Indian economy is considered to be because of two primary factors. A slowdown in fresh investment in new projects by the private sector and a slowdown in consumer demand. Because of a slowdown in consumer demand, the production of goods and services has been dipping, and that is a cause for a slowdown in the overall economy. And because fresh investment in projects is not taking off, there is again a dip in our growth. The question is, what should be the key driver to ensure that there is a revival of the Indian economy? Is it to do that we need to focus on increasing consumer demand, or do we need to focus on increasing private sector investment? India's chief economic advisor, Mr. K. Subramanian, thinks that revival of the private sector investment should be the key driver to ensure that India's sluggish economy revives and the slowdown is arrested and averted. One interesting point that Mr. Subramanian makes in this regard is, he says that there needs to be a change in the mindset of the private sector, because as per him, the private sector loves to grab the profits, but when it comes to losses, it likes to socialize them. What does he mean by this? What he means is that the private sector takes the profits, but when it comes to losses, it seeks the government to absorb them in some way or the other. He says that is not correct. And he says this with particular reference to the auto sector, which has been seeking a revival package of 1 lakh crores. He compares India's private sector to an adult, and he says that this adult has benefited the most from the 1991 reforms, and this adult, which is the private sector, must now stand on its own feet and not seek help from the father, which is the government of India. He also says that the private sector needs to inculcate good habits, such as to realize that in a market-driven economy, if certain assets are not well managed, they are bound to be reallocated to somebody else. In other words, loss-making units are bound to get a new management, and it is wrong on the part of the private sector to what he calls personalize the profits and socialize the losses. That's what he comes up with. The chief economic advisor's contention is probably partly correct or conditionally correct. When the private sector faces losses because of internal factors, which could be mismanagement, inefficient management, corporate frauds, then certainly those losses which are incurred by the corporates or the private sector, they cannot be passed on to the government. The private sector will have to digest those losses, and if units close down because of mismanagement or inefficient management, then the private sector cannot go and seek help from the government. But when it comes to external factors, the earlier ones we would call them internal factors, but when it comes to external factors, which is because of factors beyond the control of the private sector, take the ongoing US-China trade war, it's beyond the control of the private sector. Or take factors like misplaced or inappropriate government policies, or take a case of poor management of the economy, or take policies which are not timely announced by the government. When the private sector faces losses because of these external factors, in that case, those losses will have to be mitigated or met by the government of India. So when it comes to internal factors, those losses cannot be socialized. But when it comes to external factors, which have caused losses to a sector across the board, like we are seeing in the case of the automobile sector, in that case, losses will have to be socialized. If we look at the present scenario in India of dipping corporate profits and corporate stress, it is because of a deteriorating economic environment, because of policies of the government which have not been timely or which have been wholly inappropriate. And in such a case, the private sector has every right to socialize its losses, as the chief economic advisor terms it. What are the reasons that we say that the present deteriorating environment of the corporate sector, the private sector, is because of external factors and not because of internal factors primarily? The first one is, there has been a slowdown. The private sector has been badly affected because of complicated laws and huge compliance costs. The private sector is unable to bear them, and it is the government which has inflicted these on them. It's an external factor. The second one is, the adverse implications of demonetization still continue to linger. Many sectors have not yet recovered fully from it, and that again was a government move. The private sector cannot be blamed for it. The third one is, bankrupt banks and doddering NBFCs are no longer able to really fund the growth of the Indian economy, and that again is an external factor. The next is failure of flagship initiatives of the government of India like Make in India. Their failure has also deteriorated the environment that we operate in. Next one is high taxes which are levied on the private sector. Thereafter comes poor ease of doing business. If ease of doing business is not appropriate or smooth enough, the private sector growth is bound to suffer and losses also are imminent. So that's yet another one. The next factor, which we would call an external factor, is the present penalty and prosecution raj, where almost any violation by the corporate sector is tantamount to being called a criminal violation, which calls for huge penalties and prosecution. Yet another factor for its slowdown. Crony capitalism is also a factor. Crony capitalism comes with a situation where profits belong to the private sector, losses belong to the government. And crony capitalism has been prevalent in India for many years. So crony capitalism, yet another factor where the situation is socialize the losses. Global trade, as I told you, the slowing global trade, the slowing global economy, primarily because of the US-China trade war, is also a reason why we face a slowdown in the economy. And finally, missing confidence of the investor and the consumer. These are predominantly external factors beyond the control of the private sector. So if today the private sector is trying to socialize its losses, as the CEA says, it is justified. Moreover, when a slowdown in an economy is there in all the sectors across the board, in that case, it's very clear that the buck of the slowdown stops at the table of the government, and the government would have to stop in. And at that point of time, if losses get socialized, there is no other alternative to do so. Otherwise, the economic revival will only be delayed further. This is Akhilesh Bhargava signing off till we meet again. Namaskar.
HW News Network today is a year and a half old. Thanks to your support, thanks to your love, we've grown. We require your support a little more. What we request you to do is to download our free app. Our app is in Hindi, English and Marathi. We promise to update you with the latest news, views, analysis, interview. We also have a live TV going in that. If you download our app, we will get advertisers. And if we get advertisers, we'll get revenue. We get revenue, we can serve you better. So once again, please do support us. Please download our app. Namaskar.
Now be the first to know about the latest updates on our new news app. Go on your Android or iOS, search for HW News Network. Download our app, choose the language you prefer to get updates in, and be up to date with the latest news.